Well, it was mostly a thrill, and it was.
Before Mick Fleetwood became a rock legend, he was a kid in a tiny room. Banging on pots and pans like the whole world was his stage, Mick Fleetwood was born on June 24, 1947. In Rodruth, Cornwall, England, a place still healing from the scars of World War II, food was rationed. Money was tight, and most families lived with a quiet kind of hardship. But even in that austerity, his childhood had a warmth most people miss. His father served in the Royal Air Force, and the discipline of military life shaped the family home. There were rules, schedules, and a sense that life had to be earned. Yet even in the strictness, music found a way in. From a very early age, Mick showed a restless energy, a hunger for rhythm that couldn't be ignored. His family didn't have much, but they made room for music. Jazz drifted from the radio, and his father, fascinated by distant cultures, brought home African drumming records from Egypt. Mick listened, entranced, as if he'd discovered a language only his body could speak. By age 6, he was tapping those beats on pots and pans, building makeshift drum kits from cardboard boxes. It wasn't just play. It was obsession. Every sound felt like a piece of a bigger puzzle. When his family moved to Egypt, the world opened up for him in a way most kids never experience. Cairo's streets were alive with music from markets, clubs, and festivals. Mick soaked it all in, letting those rhythms seep into his bones. When he returned to London at 10, he wasn't the same boy. He carried with him a mind full of foreign beats, a sense of rhythm that didn't fit the standard British music of the time. He was different, and that difference would become his power. The moment you see Mick Fleetwood today, it is hard to imagine the boy he once was, pounding on pots and pans in a cramped London flat. But that's exactly where his story begins. In a world where music wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Hook. Before Fleetwood Mac became a global empire, Mick was a kid with a dream and nothing but a rhythm in his hands, and the world wasn't ready for him yet. Mick was born into a military family in 1947, a time when England was still rebuilding from the war. Ration books, modest wages, and quiet discipline were the norm. His father served in the Royal Air Force, and the family moved often, chasing new postings and new routines. But even in that strict environment, music found its way into the household. When Mick was only 4, his family moved to Wales. It was there that his father returned from Egypt with African drumming records. And something inside Mick clicked. He didn't just listen, he absorbed the rhythms. At 6, he was already tapping those beats on pots, pans, and anything he could find. By the time he was 10, the family moved again, this time to Egypt, and Mick's world exploded with sound. Cairo introduced him to street drummers, market rhythms, and the kind of music that didn't follow rules. He watched musicians play with freedom, and he tried to copy their patterns back home. When the family returned to London in 1957, Mick didn't just bring memories. He brought a rhythm inside him that was unlike anything British kids were learning at the time, and that difference would become his greatest strength. Mick Fleetwood didn't just want to play music, he needed it. And the moment he realized music could be more than a dream, his life changed forever. When Mick returned to London in the late 1950s, he didn't fit in. He was a kid with an African rhythm inside him. British music at the time was still rooted in traditional rock and roll and skiffle. He didn't sound like anyone else, and that made him feel like an outsider. But it also made him dangerous. At 15, he began sneaking into local clubs, watching bands perform and studying their moves. He didn't just watch, he absorbed everything. The way drummers hit the cymbals, the timing of a snare, the way a beat could make an entire room move. It wasn't just music to him, it was a language. His first real break came when he joined a band called The Chains. They weren't famous, but they were his first taste of what it meant to play in a real group. To lock into a groove and to feel the power of a live audience. Mick was good, but he still felt like he was chasing something bigger. Then in 1967, everything shifted. He met a young guitarist named Peter Green and a bassist named John McVie. Together, They formed a band that would soon become the foundation of something huge. The moment Mick hit the drums with them, it was like the rhythm finally found its home. The sound wasn't just music, it was chemistry. And Mick knew, deep in his bones, that this was the start of something that would change everything. Some bands form in studios. Some form in garages. But Fleetwood Mac was born out of a moment so electric, it felt like fate. In 1967, Mick Fleetwood was still searching for the sound that matched the rhythm inside him. Then he met Peter Green, a young guitarist with a talent so intense it bordered on obsession. Green was quiet, mysterious, and insanely gifted. He played with a blues feeling that made the room feel smaller, like the music was pulling you closer. When Mick heard him, something clicked. The pair began jamming together. Soon they found a bassist who could match their intensity, John McVie. The chemistry was instant. The three of them weren't just playing songs, they were building a new language, a sound that was raw, emotional, and rooted in blues, but ready to explode into something bigger. They needed a name that captured their energy. They chose Fleetwood Mac, a blend of Mick's last name and John McVie's, decision that reflected the band's new identity, not just a group, but a force. A unit built around rhythm, emotion, and pure musical power. Their early years were not glamorous. They toured small venues, played long sets, and lived in cramped spaces. But the audiences reacted like they were watching something historic. The band was not just playing music, they were creating a new blueprint for rock. Their sound was gritty, real, and unfiltered. It wasn't polished, and that was the point. They were proving that the blues was not dead. It was alivened. It was evolving. And at the center of it all was Mick Fleetwood, the drummer who had once beaten on pots and pans, now driving a band that would soon become one of the biggest names in music history, Fleetwood. Mac didn't climb to fame slowly. They exploded into the music world. But the cost of that explosion was already writing itself into their story. After forming in 1967, Fleetwood Mac's early years were electric, intense, and unpredictable. They weren't just a band, they were a force, and the music world couldn't ignore them. Their sound was raw, rooted in blues, but it had a spark that felt modern, like a storm arriving before anyone could predict it. Their first breakthrough came with the single Albatross in 1968. The song was different from anything else at the time, a dreamy instrumental that carried a haunting beauty. It climbed the charts and gave the band their first real taste of international attention. Suddenly, the world was watching. But with success came chaos. The band was still young, still searching for stability, and their lives were filled with the kind of turbulence that often follows early fame. Relationships grew intense, egos expanded, and the pressure to deliver only increased. Their lineup shifted constantly as musicians came and went. Searching for their place in the band's evolving identity, the most important change was the arrival of Christine McVie, a singer and keyboardist who brought a new emotional depth to the group. Her voice gave the band a softer side, balancing the raw blues with warmth and vulnerability. She was the glue that helped hold the band together, yet the band's direction was still uncertain. They were a band of talented individuals. They had not yet become the legendary force the world would later know. They were close, but not there yet. And then the 1970s arrived, bringing with it a shift that would change everything. Some bands have a breakthrough album, but Fleetwood Mac had a rebirth, and it came from a relationship nobody saw coming. By the early 1970s, Fleetwood Mac was still searching for its true identity. The band had talent, but it lacked the sound that would make the world stop and listen. Their lineup changed constantly, and the music was good, but it wasn't yet legendary. Then came a meeting that changed everything. In 1974, Mick Fleetwood was introduced to a duo from California, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. They were a couple, young and magnetic, with a sound that was both raw and mystical. They weren't just musicians, they were storytellers. Their songs had a sense of longing, romance, and mystery that made people feel something deeper than a melody. Mick knew immediately they were different. He heard the potential, and he felt it in his bones. He invited them to join Fleetwood Mac, even though the decision was risky. The band was already established, and bringing in new members meant starting over in many ways. But the gamble paid off. The new lineup brought an energy that reshaped the band. Lindsey's guitar work was precise, intense, and emotionally charged. Stevie's voice was haunting, powerful, and unforgettable. Together, they brought a sound that was modern, dramatic, and deeply human. Then came the album that changed everything, Fleetwood Mac. In 1975, the record was a huge hit, but it was only the beginning. It laid the foundation for what would become one of the biggest albums of all time. The band had found its voice, and they were about to become unstoppable. Imagine making the biggest album of your life while your world is falling apart. That is the story of Rumors, and it was built on heartbreak. By 1976, Fleetwood Mac was riding high. Their 1975 self-titled album had already catapulted them into superstardom. But the pressure was just beginning. They were constantly on tour, living in hotels, and surrounded by fame that felt both thrilling and suffocating. Then the cracks began to show. The band was caught in a web of relationships and emotions that were collapsing in real time. Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks were breaking up. John and Christine McVie were getting divorced. Mick Fleetwood was dealing with his own personal struggles, including a difficult divorce and the constant stress of holding the band together. The band was living together in a mansion, California, trying to record the next album. The tension was so intense you could feel it in the walls. Arguments erupted in the studio. People wrote songs like they were writing diaries. Every lyric was a confession, every melody a cry for help, and somehow, through all of that pain, they created Rumors, an album that didn't just capture their heartbreak, it transformed it into art. The record was raw, emotional, and brutally honest. Songs like Dreams, Go Your Own Way, and The Chain weren't just hits, they were survival. The band's ability to turn their pain into music connected with millions of people who were experiencing their own heartbreaks. Rumors became a global phenomenon. It won a Grammy. It topped charts worldwide. It sold millions of copies, and it still stands as one of the best-selling albums in history. But the real story isn't the success. The real story is how they made something beautiful out of something broken, and that is what made Fleetwood Mac more than a band. They became a mirror for anyone who has ever loved, lost, survived. After the biggest album of their lives, Fleetwood Mac should have been untouchable. Instead, they were left with a new kind of battle, one that fame could not solve. When Rumors exploded worldwide, the band should have felt victorious. But the truth was darker. The album's success only amplified the emotional damage that created it. The songs that saved them also reminded them of what was broken. Touring became a test of endurance. The constant travel, the late-night shows, the endless crowds, it all felt like running on a treadmill that never stopped. The band members were exhausted, emotionally and physically. The love that once connected them had turned into resentment. Resentment had turned into numbness. On top of that, addiction began to seep into the cracks. Drugs and alcohol were everywhere, offered like comfort and escape. For some, it was a way to cope with the pressure. For others, it became a dangerous trap. The music industry was a machine, and it didn't care who it chewed up, even as their fame grew. The band's unity began to collapse. People started to leave, relationships fell apart, and the band that once felt unstoppable began to feel fragile. There were rumors, fights, and public breakdowns. The spotlight was bright, but it didn't bring clarity. It only exposed the cracks. And yet, even in the darkest moments, Fleetwood Mac kept creating. They refused to disappear. They kept writing, recording, and performing. Because music was the one thing that still felt honest. They had survived the storm. But the silence that followed would test them in ways no one expected. What happens when a band survives its own destruction? For Fleetwood Mac, the answer was not peace, it was reinvention. After the Rumors era, Fleetwood Mac could have faded into the background like so many bands do after a peak. But the story didn't end there. They kept moving, even when it felt impossible. The 1980s arrived with new music, new pressures, in a changing industry. The band released Tango in the Night, an album that brought them back into the spotlight and proved that they still had the power to captivate audiences. Songs like Little Lies and Everywhere became instant classics, and the band once again found themselves at the center of pop culture. But success did not heal the wounds. The band was still carrying the same emotional baggage, and the pressure of fame had only grown. The internal tensions remained, and the relationships were still strained. They were still living in the shadow of their own masterpiece, and then the lineup shifted again. Members came and went, relationships changed, and the band struggled to keep the magic alive. It wasn't easy to recreate what had happened in the 1970s because that era was unique. It was built on love, pain, and raw honesty. It was a moment in time that could not be replicated. Yet Fleetwood Mac kept going. Because the music had become more than a career. It was their identity. They toured, they recorded, and they continued to perform for millions of fans around the world. The band's legacy grew, not just through their music, but through the story of their survival. Because in the end, Fleetwood Mac was never just a band. It was proof that art can rise from chaos, and that even the most broken people can create something timeless. Fleetwood Mac didn't just change music. They've changed how we understand the human heart. Decades after their biggest albums, their songs still echo in movies, playlists, and stadiums. Rumors is no longer just an album, it's a cultural landmark. It represents a time when music was raw, emotional, and fearless. It proved that heartbreak could be turned into art, and that pain could become a masterpiece. Their influence stretches far beyond the 1970s. Artists, across generations, cite Fleetwood Mac as inspiration. From pop stars to rock legends, their sound has been sampled, covered, and reimagined. Their songs have become the soundtrack to countless lives, the backdrop to breakups, reunions, and late-night drives. But the true legacy of Fleetwood Mac is not just their music. It is the story behind it. The band showed the world that creativity is messy, that genius can come from chaos, and that the greatest art often comes from the darkest places. They also changed the way bands were perceived. They proved that a band could be successful even while fractured, even while damaged, and even while imperfect. They turned their personal struggles into something universal. And that is why their music still matters. Even now, the name Fleetwood Mac still carries weight. Their songs are still played, still loved, still remembered. The band may have changed over time, but their impact remains the same, in the end. Fleetwood Mac's legacy is simple. They turned their heartbreak into a sound that refused to fade.
Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into Hollywood's hidden history.